Weathering is the process by which rocks are broken down by either one of two ways, physical means or chemical means. The first kind of weathering is mechanical weathering. This is the breakdown of rock by physical means. Sometimes it's also called physical weathering. They both mean the same thing. Like in the picture, we see the hammer is breaking apart the rock. Each of those little pieces are still the same composition as they were when they were part of the bigger rock. Nothing has changed except really the look or the shape of the rock. The second kind of weathering is chemical weathering. This involves breaking the rock down by chemical means. In this picture, we see the same statue. On the left, we see it in its earlier form. You can see it's of a person and you can see the features of the person. But the picture on the right is about 70 years later, and what we see is all the details are gone. This was probably due to some kind of acid rain or other acid precipitation that has slowly eaten away at the rock, breaking it down. Look at the bottom of your notes page. In the big circle, write one word to define weathering. So now we're going to look at the two kinds of weathering more closely. The first kind we're going to look at is mechanical weathering, and you can see there are 4 different kinds. The first kind of mechanical weathering is called ice wedging. This is when water gets into cracks in rocks and freezes. When water freezes, it expands or gets bigger. This breaks the rock into even smaller pieces. Here's an example of ice wedging. Starting with the picture at the top, we see the rock begins with a small crack. Water gets in that crack. And as the temperature drops, of course, that water is going to freeze. When that water freezes, it expands. Skip down to picture C, the third picture, we see that the crack is getting bigger and bigger. And eventually, over time, this breaks the rock. Another kind of mechanical weathering is called abrasion. This is the grinding or wearing away of rock through mechanical action of other rocks or sometimes sand particles. Here's an example of abrasion. In this picture, what we see is rocks at the bottom of a river. So the water is moving from the left to the right. The rocks at the bottom, starting on the left side of the picture, are bigger. And as the water moves, it moves the rocks along the bottom. Well, the rocks bump into each other, and because the water moves forcefully, it chips off pieces of the rock. And you can see as you move across the picture to the right, those big rocks have gotten smaller and smaller because they are breaking apart because they're bumping into each other and chipping each other. A third kind of mechanical weathering is by plants and animals. Believe it or not, plant roots can actually break apart rocks, as well as animals when they dig and burrow underground. So here's some examples of plants and animals breaking rocks. The picture in the top left, we see a tree whose roots are growing underneath the sidewalk and cracking it. You might have seen something like this in your neighborhood. The picture on the bottom right is an animal who lives underground. Well, when these animals dig their homes underground, they chip away and break apart rocks as they dig. And finally, water is another type of mechanical weathering. Water can break apart rocks as it runs over them in a river, and sometimes rain can also do this too. Here's an example of some rocks who have been weathered by water. You might have seen some of these rocks before. They have very smooth edges because they were probably in a river. And over time, the moving water slowly chips away and rounds off the corners of these rocks. This is an example of mechanical weathering. So all of those examples we just talked about were mechanical weathering. Now we're going to look at chemical weathering. All of these involve a chemical change that takes place to weaken the rock. And most of these are very slow processes and take a long time to break apart the rock. So the first kind of chemical weathering is acid precipitation. Acid precipitation is usually acid rain, but in some cases there could be acid snow too. All acid rain is polluted rain, rain that's dirty. but it contains high amounts of acid that can slowly break apart rocks. So here's the same picture we've seen before, but just to review, the picture on the left is how the statue looked to begin with. We can see the details of a face and the hand and the fingers. But the picture on the right shows us that over time, all those details have been weathered away. This could have been done by acid precipitation, where the acid in that rain has slowly eaten away the rock surfaces and broken the rock down. Oxidation is another kind of chemical weathering. Oxidation is when a chemical reaction takes place with water and it mixes with the air to react with iron that's in rocks. Another name for this is rust. So here's an example of oxidation. This rock has some iron in it, and apparently it has gotten wet, probably from rain, and over time the air has mixed with the water and the iron and rusted it. Rust, or oxidation, weakens the rock, and this rock will over time slowly break apart. Now earlier we said that plants can mechanically break apart rock by their roots, but they can also chemically break apart rocks. Plants chemically break apart rocks when they give off a weak acid that slowly breaks them down over time. One example of this is moss. You might have seen moss growing on rocks. Moss and other types of plants give off a very weak acid that when they grow on rocks, they begin to weaken them and slowly over time break them apart. And finally, water can chemically weather rocks. We said earlier that water can mechanically break them by moving water chipping away at them, but water can also chemically break them when it reacts to the minerals in the rocks, almost like a dissolving takes place, and this is how caves are made. So here's an example of how a cave is made. What you see, that white part, is a rock called limestone. And what has happened is water soaks into the ground and over time slowly weakens and kind of dissolves and eats away at that limestone, forming a cave.